Okay, well, very good. Welcome, everybody. I hope everyone has come through the deluge with minimal disruption. Um, so a few brief items. Um, one is before the presentation. One is to remind everybody that the fall fundraising drive for the Washington Native Plant Society is in effect. You might have gotten a letter already. And for $30 a month, we have a fabulous tote bag that no, I'm just kidding. The Plant Society relies on people to donate, which is about 70% of our revenues. So it's important. And I encourage you to donate. And the other announcement I have is that the latest info that I've been able to get, it's not official yet, but we will hopefully be returning to in-person meetings in 2022. That's the dope I get. And there will be and they're working on making it a simultaneous event with Zoom. So that will require some hardware on our part, but for those with the in-person, they will be requiring proof of vaccination. And for those who don't have or don't prefer to have that or don't prefer to come in person, we'll be doing the Zoom. So that is pretty cool. Anu, would you do the honor of introducing our speaker?
My pleasure, indeed. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our November program. Our speaker today is Dr. Joseph Hulbert. Joey is a postdoctoral research fellow at Washington State University. He is funded by the USDA. The USDA is a National Institute of Food and Agriculture unit. He's based in the Ornamental Plant Pathology program at the WSU Research and Extension Center in Puyallup. So Joey's interest in forest health goes back to his undergraduate years. He got his undergraduate degree from Washington State University, a bachelor's in natural resources. He spent 4 years also at Oregon State University, where he worked on and learned a great deal about sudden oak death. So forest health, that he got an early start with forest health. For his PhD program, though, he traveled to South Africa, now for something completely different, well, actually related, but in an amazing part of the world. There he worked on a community science program called Cape Citizen Science. As part of that program, he engaged local communities in doing research on plant diseases that affect the amazing flora of the Cape Forestic region. Now, Joey runs the Forest Health Watch program, as I mentioned, at the Puyallup Center. And Joey says he's looking for more partners and more participants in this program. He told me he'd love to engage with our society, with our chapter and other chapters of the Washington Native Plant Society. He looks forward to discussions, he says, and feedback from our group and others like us. So without further ado, here's Dr. Joey Hulbert.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Anu. That was a really great introduction. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of kind words, and I have a very thorough background. So thank you all for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm really impressed with the turnout and pleased to be here. It's such an honor to be here with this many people. And so thank you so much for the opportunity and for making this really special for us all. I do really want to emphasize that it's, you all, the Native Plant Society, members of the Native Plant Society in Washington are certainly folks that we would love to connect with more. Your perspectives are really important. And we do, as Anu said, I would love more participants, more partnerships, more collaborations. And I most certainly really value your feedback and perspective. So please engage with us more and help shape this program. And we want this program to give back in addition to accelerate and advance knowledge. So it's an important part that there's this feedback, and I really welcome any input in that regard. So I'm guessing that you all joined tonight because you're concerned about red cedar, and we're going to talk a lot about this. And what I really want to emphasize is that this is pretty troubling issue with red cedar, and it's really urgent that we try and understand what's going on. And to do that, we really need the help of individuals like yourselves to really understand and help keep Western red cedar on the landscape for future generations. And so I'll talk about that a few different times through this talk. I'm first going to just elaborate a little bit on Anu's introduction and talk a little bit more about the program that I'm coming from, so that you know we're there as a resource if you have any questions and things like that that we can help with. Then we'll talk about red cedar, how the Forest Health Watch program operates, and how community scientists are contributing to research about Western red cedar. And ultimately, we'll get to like why that is important and how we plan to use that. I like to start by acknowledging how privileged I am to get to learn and explore and discover and study these incredible ancestral lands of the indigenous peoples in the Northwest. So here is a really incredible photo taken from Anacortes near you all and near Whatcom County, just really illustrating how fortunate we are to be in these traditional homelands of the Coast Salish peoples. Tonight, I'm coming to you from Tacoma. And so I have the real privilege to learn and explore on the traditional homelands, the Puyallup tribe of Indians, of which I'm really grateful. And tonight we're talking about Western red cedar. And this process of learning about red cedar has really been a great opportunity for me, because it's helped me appreciate this place that we live in so much more. And so I hope that I can share some of that with you tonight. So as Anu mentioned, I actually did a full circle. I did my first degree at Washington State, and then went to Oregon State, and then South Africa. But I'm now working back at Washington State, and I'm pretty pleased to be here. I feel like this is home. My dad's from Mount Vernon, my mom's from Kent, and so it's really a treasure to get to live and work in this region again. But I did have a great time going to South Africa, and I just like to share this. My background's in plant disease. I studied sudden oak death, as Anu mentioned, and then that same group of fungi that are the fungal-like organisms, the same group of microbes that cause sudden oak death, I got to explore in South Africa in their biodiversity hotspot. And so that really gave me this passion for conservation and this understanding of the importance of native plants and things like that. So I certainly appreciate the Native Plant Society for that element. Also, as Anu thoroughly mentioned, I'm here tonight because of support from the USDA through a fellowship program as part of their education and workforce training. And we also benefit from some other USDA funding called the Making Tires Stennis funding. And so we just want to acknowledge that I'm really grateful that we could be here tonight because of that funding. So I work at a research and extension lab in Puyallup. It's a pretty incredible piece of land, and we're really fortunate that we get to work in this kind of urbanizing environment, but there's still space to do some research. And so I'm part of a program called the Ornamental Plant Pathology Program. And we work very closely with the nursery trade. And this is kind of where our ornamental focus comes from, as we work with the nursery trade to help them prevent spreading disease within their operations or outside of their operations in the global trade of live plants. But we also have some other cool research we do a lot of exploration of genetic diversity, and so we're looking at how genetic diversity can be used as a tool to deal with diseases and insects and climate change and things like that. And we use Christmas trees a lot. It's almost a good model system to do some experiments. But my mentor, Gary Chastagner, is really Christmas tree disease expert, probably in the world. The Northwest produces a third of the, between a quarter and a third of the US's Christmas trees every year. So it's pretty cool industry in Washington. We also have some cool stuff going on with Madrone. We have some common garden sites where we're exploring genetic diversity again, where we have Madrones collected from throughout the range. So there's about 115 families that we have planted in 5 different sites, spanning from British Columbia to Oregon. And we're trying to monitor which of those genotypes or which of those families or populations will be the best adapted for future climates and the most resistant to things like leaf blight and stuff like that. And this final photo is of a disease that's emerging more recently. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but not too much because we're really focused on red cedar. But this is a disease called sooty bark disease, and it's emerging on maples. And we found it in Bellingham and Anacortes and Seattle and Tacoma and Olympia now. And so you might see an unhealthy maple and you might notice the bark is flecking off, and which there's this black sooty spores underneath. And that's something we would love to know about if you do see it. So that's why I'd like to highlight it. But speaking of madrones, I just want to also put a plug in for another program that I'm involved with loosely called the Arbutus Army. And so if you love Pacific madrone or madrona, or maybe you call it arbutus, we do too. And there's this program called the Arbutus Army. And I suspect you all will appreciate this as Native Plant Society members, but we call it Army because it's the shorthand for Arbutus menziesii. And so if you also love madrone, you've probably also noticed that there's a lot of berries out this time of year. I encourage you to join this Arbutus Army. There's a listserv, there's a newsletter. Every year, a couple times a year, we try and host seminars about the stuff going on. We have a madrone walk coming up in Tacoma and another newsletter coming out soon. But anyway, I just wanted to give a little further introduction to myself so that you know I'm here as a resource. I'm happy to help if you come across a tree disease or a tree health issue and you're interested in knowing more. Feel free to reach out to me. I see there's some chat. I'm just catching up on the chat. Is everything okay with me? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so feel free though to ask a question in the chat and I'll try and get to it as we go along. I'm gonna switch gears now from the intro and start talking about the core of why we're all here, this Western red cedar dieback issue. So to begin, I'll just quickly talk about red cedar. This is a photo from Anacortes. It's not Whatcom County, Skagit County, but it's near enough that it's fairly representative of what we'll see in our forest. Sometimes you see this really incredible, almost pure stand of Western red cedar. Western red cedar is really important to our region. And this is the primary reason that we selected red cedar as the first project of the Forest Health Watch, because it has this super rich cultural importance to the Northwest and the peoples in the Northwest. Red cedar is often considered a really generous species because of all the gifts that it's provided to Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. We know that red cedar is more difficult to access now than it ever has been. And it's really troubling when we think about all the traditional uses of red cedar and how some of our Indigenous communities don't have the same access anymore. So red cedar is really important traditionally for transportation, for shelter, for things, textiles and warmth, food storage containers, lots of incredible art, medicinal uses, and also as a carving, source of carving. It's often referred to as the tree of life, and I really love this diagram from Heidi Bohan's book, People of Cascadia, that just illustrates some of the really cool gifts that this generous tree has provided, and should give us a really strong sense of pride for this tree, this iconic tree of the Northwest. I've also more recently been questioning whether it's really appropriate for me to share much about this bundle, but I was given this the cedar foliage bundle, and I was cautioned that, be careful with this, it's a very powerful tree, but also if you dry this cedar foliage out and you drop a little piece of it into boiling water, and then you breathe in the steam from that water, it's supposed to be really great for treating respiratory issues and symptoms from, say, the common cold, or maybe even the pandemic. But that's my own interpretation. But I was cautioned, if you are going to use this, consult a traditional healer about the amounts, because it's very powerful. Western red cedar is also really important when we think about the industrial heritage of the Northwest, though. But this is another really cool feature of red cedar, another reason to be really proud of it. A lot of our towns in the Northwest are mill towns. A lot of them, like Tacoma, had 9 or 10 mills on the waterfront alone, where we're bringing in enormous cedar trees, and we're producing cedar planks that are keeping people dry, using them as roofs. Cedar planks, which are more structural, but cedar shingles, which are used for shingle roofs in the past, and really led to the boom of some of these cities that we live in. And so it has a really cool history and a cool role in the history of the Northwest. Red cedar is also really important when we talk about the ecological processes and services that is contributing to, when it's flooding in Whatcom County, you can think of a red cedar for holding on to that soil, maybe preventing that other tree from sliding across your road. These red cedar are contributing in really important ways in terms of soil stability and nutrient cycling and water filtering when you have those events. Red cedar is also really important for our salmon. It's there along the stream banks, providing shade, keeping that temperature regulated, in addition to supporting owls and all kinds of other species and habitat. I always like to talk also about the urban forest angle. Urban forests are extremely important, and one of the really cool things about the Northwest. These trees in these environments are providing super important services like reducing the effect of heat islands. There's a lot of connections with mental health and greening and urban nature. There's clearly the same services that they're providing out in natural environments, they're also providing in urban environments like air quality and water quality. But I like to show this map because these are all the street trees. The city of Seattle does a great job monitoring their street trees and making that data accessible. And if you just pull out the red cedar alone, there's more than 1,600 red cedar trees in Seattle, which they have an enormous footprint. This is a pretty substantial part of the forest canopy in the city of Seattle. So again, red cedar is just really important when we talk about the footprint. And there's a tiny bit about that at foresthealth.org/Seattle. It's also really important, has an enormous footprint when we think about its distribution in the Northwest. Ranges from Alaska to California, goes as far east as Western Montana. Some of the densest populations, some of the stands with the greatest basal area of red cedar is actually in this northern Idaho area. So it's a really cool feature of the Northwest, and it has a really important big footprint in our environment. So again, red cedar, really important because of the cultural legacy, also because of the industrial heritage that it has, also because the ecological services in both the natural and the urban environments, and because it has this enormous footprint in the landscape. It's really important that we keep red cedar healthy, or at least we try and understand when red cedar's under threat. So this brings us to our concern. We know red cedar is really important. Why are we concerned? Well, we're concerned because we're getting a lot of reports of dieback. Scientists and citizens alike are reporting mature trees dying, trees with really thin canopies. Sometimes the trees, the top of the trees are dying. Sometimes they're in the middle of forest. Sometimes they're in an urban environment. It seems like a really complex issue, but this is pretty good representation of what we're seeing on the west side of the Cascades and what I trust you've seen in Whatcom County. And so some of these photos may have even come from Whatcom County. I think this one, for example, is in Skagit Valley. And this is definitely on Skagit Valley. So just to illustrate what some of the community scientists are showing in the breadth and the range of what we're seeing, these are all photos that are shared by community scientists in Portland. These are around the Seattle area. Again, just this characteristic top dieback. I will point out with this that sometimes you'll see very, very fine branches still on the tree, which indicates that this is pretty recent dieback, whereas sometimes the tree will not have any fine branches left, which indicates it's a couple of years old. And then here in Vancouver, so we have dieback from Oregon to Vancouver at a minimum, and we're seeing it across this West Coast range. It's also been picked up in a lot of news articles, and you may have all seen a Bellingham Herald's article that was really wonderful. I actually didn't get to read it because it was behind a paywall, but I trust it was a good article, and I'm just thrilled to have that opportunity to share our concerns with broader community. So this is also really, it's demonstrated by the Forest Service collects these aerial survey data every year. And so they fly airplanes over our forested areas every year in an effort to monitor the health issues. And so in 2017, they started documenting where they were seeing red cedar dieback or red cedar decline. And every year since then, they just see more and more. And generally, the consensus is that this is driven by longer and hotter droughts. And, you know, it's pretty believable. It's a really wet species, or it's a water-loving species. And the Northwest has been drier and hotter every year since about 2015. What's concerning, too, is that there's this sense of urgency. There's already, this is an individual from Vancouver Island who's telling us they're not going to plant red cedar anymore because they're seeing this dieback. And I understand. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to adapt to future climates, and it's a great opportunity to really experiment and see what works and what doesn't, and try things out. But it's too early to really give up on red cedar. And so that's where we need your help. I'm just going to catch up on the chat real quick. Just take a pause for a second and let me get back to this. There is a question. If you all don't mind, I'm going to take the second to answer this before we move on to the next part about the Forest Health Watch program. So Rita has noted that they have an unhealthy native hazel, and each year is dying a little bit more back. It's only one trunk of the tree. Yeah, water is not a problem because it's near a stream and it's under a canopy of large. So this is, I really like this observation. I haven't heard anything about hazel that much. Actually, I heard one person from Tualatin. Anyway, someone from the city in South King County mentioned to me they were seeing some disease on a hazel, but that's the only thing I've heard about that. So I like this perspective. I like your input, because once I hear of a concern, then if I hear about it again in a couple of weeks, then these kind of concerns start telling me what new issues to have on our radar and what we should be looking out for. But I really like your comment, because you say it's not a water problem because it's near a stream. And I feel like that's part of the complexity of this story, is that we're seeing red cedar die right next to streams, just like your hazel. And to me, what we're kind of learning is that that's because, this is our hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that red cedars near streams may be more vulnerable to climate change, to longer and hotter droughts, because their roots are shallower. So if you're next to a stream and you don't have to go that deep to find water, then you have really shallow roots. And if the stream dries out an extra, a week or two earlier than it normally does, or the water table goes down a couple extra feet than it normally does, that tree is going to be really vulnerable to that change. And so that is kind of our working hypothesis. And it's really a question about stream permanence. Is that stream flowing the same amount as it has historically throughout that tree's life? But it's a really, that's a hypothesis. We don't really know. There could also be, some water-loving fungus that maybe was brought in by the stream or swam up the stream. There's other hypotheses out there that we should test before we really could make recommendations or anything about that. But that's kind of our running hypothesis with the red cedar. Melanie's now just commented that they're seeing browning at the base of cedar fronds. That's interesting. Every year, red cedar does drop its older foliage. So you will see a seasonal flush of 3 to 4 year old foliage, and that will be inside the branch. It'll be further up the branch towards the canopy. And so if you're just seeing browning inside the canopy, like up the branch like that, then that's just a seasonal thing. However, some folks have suggested that it's much worse this year than it was previously. And so I think that's kind of how cedar acclimates or just deals year to year with the variation in the temperature or the precipitation. It just, some years it might shed a little more than others. But if you're actually seeing the tips to the branches and like the freshest foliage dying, that's a little more concerning. And what's interesting to hear your comment that it's the lower or the base, that to me could suggest that doesn't sound like drought in that case, because it seems to be the drought response is the top dying. It just can't send the water all the way to the top. If the lower part of the tree is dying, that might suggest there's a disease that kind of accumulates at the bottom. And we can talk a little more about that, but I don't quite know. I'm going to move on, but these are really good questions and I welcome a lot more. Thanks, everyone. Oh, I see, actually, sorry. Okay. I'm going to check these as live answers, but feel free to follow up. Okay. Yeah, you all are incredible. This is good to have some engagement, and I welcome it. just going to give a couple slides about the Forest Health Watch program. We really just feel like we want to see this as a program with many projects over time. And so this red cedar is really the first project, if that makes sense. But we're always have our ears out. What's the next project? What's your next biggest concern? Is it big leaf maple? Is it Western hemlock? You know, how else? What should we try and do next? There's a lot of different ways to engage with the Forest Health Watch. I like to encourage you, if you want to stay in better touch, there's the community, you can sign up as a community scientist, although you don't need to at all. Every month we do these office hours. So there's periods of time where we're just dedicated to, we're there to answer any questions. There's an office hours question and answer where you can come with any forest health question. There's an office hours for using iNaturalist if you want to learn how to use iNaturalist. We also have an office hours for tribal members. We also do, every month, we do research updates. And so this is where we sit back and look at the iNaturalist data and the red cedar data, and we walk through what we're seeing. And so we do that once a month. And that's open to anyone if you want to engage. As I mentioned, the Red Cedar Project's one of the projects that we're carrying or that we'd like to share with you today. There's other projects on iNaturalist that we've created as a part of this, but really our energy is going towards this Western Red Cedar Dieback. So I'm going to introduce that a little more. First, I'm going to talk about a couple of these other projects just really quickly. So one, we have the Red Cedar Dieback project, which we'll get into a little bit more. But we're also hearing and we're seeing some dieback and alder, and this might connect back to that the stream permanence issue. It's another water-loving species, but we're seeing some dieback in the canopy. There's also a lot of concern around big leaf maple decline or big leaf maple dieback. This has been we've been scratching our heads about this for a decade, but excuse me, there. Like a few weeks ago, there was a study out of University of Washington that linked this to warmer and hotter longer and hotter droughts. And so there's a strong connection or a good link between climate variables and the health of red cedar, or the health of big leaf maple. Just guess I'm getting tired. But something else that's kind of caught our eye lately and that is emerging on maples and we think is confounding that story of the climate change being the cause of the dieback is that the sooty bark disease I mentioned to you previously is, so in Seattle at least, there's been a number of trees where we've confirmed this disease is present on maples that are in decline. And so there's a Seattle Times article. It got some things right, not everything. It's not a new fungus. It's a fungus we've known that's apparently been in the state since 1968, but is emerging as an issue now because it's favored by warmer temperatures, and it when the trees are also stressed from drought, then they're more vulnerable. So that combination has really led to the emergence of this fungus and this concern, and I encourage you to engage with us about this if you see dying maples. These are kind of the classic symptoms, and the reason it has this sooty bark disease is because the spores kind of look sooty when the bark is flaked off. Something to note is that you'll see black underneath the bark. So if you see black on the outside of the bark, no reason to be afraid or no reason to be concerned. That's probably not a fungus that's harming the tree. But if the bark flakes off and you see black underneath, that could be the sooty bark disease. We're also hearing a lot about hemlocks and unhealthy hemlocks. And this kind of goes back to Melanie's comment that it's the needles or the lower parts of the canopy that tend to die first. And to us, we're kind of hypothesizing that there's a fungus involved in this dieback. We also know that there's a hemlock looper outbreak in Baker Lake area. So if you're in that area of Whatcom, it's kind of a moth that's impacting the hemlocks. But anyway, there's a handful of projects and these are all iNaturalist projects, which I'm going to introduce in a second. And these are all part of the Forest Health Watch. One, I think this is no, it's not the last slide. It's almost the last slide about the Forest Health Watch program, but you can also engage with us. We do every month, we do a biosurveillance training. So these are like, what insects and diseases should I be watching out for when I'm looking at trees? And so we also do that as part of the Forest Health Watch. And we have a few hypothesis tests running now. And so this is kind of a fun way to get involved with the Forest Health Watch if you're interested. These are all about red cedar. And the way this works is we have a specific hypothesis. So for example, we hypothesize that red cedar trees will be less healthy in areas with hotter surface temperatures. And this is like a King County study. So I apologize if you're joining us from outside of King County, like myself actually, but King County did this really cool thing where they measured the surface temperature at 3 different times in the day on a hot day in July. And then they made this data available. So you can see like Kent is much hotter than say Seattle. And so what we did is we worked with some cities to get street tree data, and we picked out red cedars from as many of these cities as we can. And now we have these kind of red cedars that we're asking people to visit. And so it's this hypothesis that of these trees, the ones that are in the hotter areas, which we intentionally picked, will be less healthy than the ones in the cooler areas. And so that you can learn more if you go foresthealth.org/redhot. And I really welcome you to travel to one of those trees and share it on iNaturalist. That would be awesome to have your involvement in this kind of direct hypothesis test. We've also done one about redlining in Seattle. And so we're interested in knowing whether trees in these historically redlined areas are less healthy than trees in the non-redlined areas. And we really just want to amplify that, well, one, what does it mean if trees are less healthy in these areas? And two, if it means they need more support, is that a symbol for the inequities in those areas? So happy to talk about that more. But again, we just randomly picked red cedar trees in these different areas. And these pink ones are the ones that have been visited by community scientists, and all the green are ones we need folks to visit. And right now we have kind of a little contest, if you will. The Seattle Aquarium gave us some tickets. And so whoever visits most of these in November gets these 4 Seattle Aquarium tickets. So if you want to make a trip down for a weekend, there's a good chance you could win those. But anyway, that's a lot of information about the Forest Health Watch program in general. We're going to switch back to how citizen scientists or community scientists are getting involved in the red cedar dieback research and why it's important. Let me see if I missed anything. So is dieback fatal? That's a great question, Lyle. I think in some cases the tree could come back, but we're definitely seeing a lot more completely dead trees than we ever have. So that kind of indicates that these trees are, there's more trees dying than there were ever before that we're aware of. Also, my impression is that each year kind of you'll see this top dieback, and then next year you'll see more dieback. And so my impression is that they don't recover, but we don't have a great understanding of like how long it takes for the full tree to die. And in some cases, you'll see these old mature trees with spike tops that have been dead for a decade, and they're still pretty great trees. It's just the top is dead. And so it's unclear. That seems different. We're more interested in knowing where the like brand new dead tops are, if that makes sense. Fred has commented, Okay, effects of increasing summer droughts on trees that have mushrooms as partners. Yeah, there is some research on red cedar mycorrhizae, but I don't know a lot about it. But I'm with you, or I think you're right that it's not as reliant on mycorrhizae as say I did for. But give me a couple minutes. I'm going to talk about some of the fungi that might be involved. We have a grant out right now to look at the soil microbes, and we did want to approach that with the environmental sequencing, so we would see both beneficial fungi and pathogens potentially, and we wanted to compare healthy and unhealthy red cedar. And so that's kind of the plan. We were supposed to find out about that grant in September, but they told us they can't tell us the outcome of the grant until the federal budget passes. So we're just kind of like in limbo. We'll see if that gets funded or not, but we'd love to explore that more. But I do have a slide or two about a fungi that we're interested in, a fungus. Anyway, so I've mentioned iNaturalist previously. We worked closely with the state agencies like DNR. Melissa Fisher is incredible. She's an entomologist actually from DNR, but Betsy Goodrich is a forest pathologist out of the U.S. Forest Service, Forest Health and Protection, and she's based in Wenatchee. And together with them and Christine Bowl, who's another entomologist at Oregon State or Oregon Department of Forestry, like they're kind of Team Forest Health, Team Cedar, the folks focusing on this issue, and they had created a Survey 123 project. And so if any of you have access to Esri and ArcGIS and you prefer to contribute to research with that, I can put you in touch with them, or you can find their details on our website. But they created a project with the intention that their networks, like people in the Forest Service, would be able to contribute observations of where they see unhealthy red cedar on their project, the Survey 123. But for most people, we don't have access to ArcMap, or we don't pay for an Esri license, and so we can't contribute to that. So that was our motivation to establish an iNaturalist project, is that we want more people to be able to participate. So iNaturalist is really cool. It's open, it's donor driven, there's no ads or anything. You can use it on your computer or on your phone or your tablet or whatever mobile device you want. It's pretty amazing. I'll explain why. We really like iNaturalist because there's already 4 million people using it, and there's a pretty robust data set already on it. There's like 65 million observations. And so if you search red cedar near you, you'll see there's already hundreds that have been shared in Whatcom County, probably close to you. But it's also really cool, it's also really cool in its capacity to make projects. And so we really like it and like working with it because you can customize projects pretty easily. And so it's a really great tool, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. In general, the way iNaturalist works is you can you take a picture of any organism and you share it online, and people can comment and help you identify what you saw. In some cases, you might find something that other people thought were extinct or other people didn't know occurred there. And it's really neat also for tracking invasives and noxious weeds and things like that. But the way it works for us is we created a specific project on there. If you go and you search red cedar on iNaturalist, you will actually find 13,000 different observations. But the problem is we have no idea if that's a healthy tree or an unhealthy tree. And so we created a specific project that asks that question essentially. So the way it works is you will join this red cedar dieback map project. Then when you add an observation on iNaturalist, you tag the project. And when you do that, it asks a couple questions like, was that tree healthy and where was it? So it asks, what symptoms did you see? Was the tree really easy to see through? or did the tree have a dying, dead top, or was the tree completely dead? I also asked things like, was it next to a road, or is it in the middle of a forest, or is it out in the middle of a field or a golf course? We also ask you to look for things like fungi and insects, and so Fred, this is kind of not necessarily the beneficial fungi, but did you see armillaria on there is really important for us to know, because we'd love to know, is this something we should be watching for more? We generally just ask, what other reasons might that tree be unhealthy? And so you could comment, it's covered in English ivy, or there's blackberry all over it, or there's invasive plants, or maybe you see a mushroom like this armillaria, or Swinetiae, or some of these other fungi that might infect Western red cedar. And so we encourage you to comment on that. For the sake of time, I'm not going to share this story, but essentially we found armillaria affecting Western red cedar in a few different places. In some cases, we'll find insect frass, and so this is like beetle excrement. Sometimes you'll see actual little holes. Sometimes if you can peel back the bark, you might actually see the cedar bark beetle. And what's cool about bark beetles is you can identify the species based on the pattern of these galleries, is what we call them. Bark beetles are really cute. But there's this other fungus that we're starting to scratch our head about. Previously, I think this is recognized as like a heart rot, and like not necessarily known to be a problematic species on cedar, but we're starting to see, especially this time of year, it seems to like do really well. And so if you see this, please take a picture when you add an observation and let us know. But we're thinking it's a coniophora. I'm happy to look at that. We also have a kind of a different way to visualize the data, and I welcome you to go and explore this. You can interact with it and see, for example, you can click on Dominic's name. Dominic is an amazing community scientist in Whatcom. He's like, before he got involved, we didn't really have a great understanding of the condition of red cedar in that area, but he has like single-handedly recorded more than 100 trees in his own capacity. And so we're really grateful for the exceptional community scientists that really get into this, and I love it. And so I encourage you to go and explore this dashboard. It updates every day. It's foresthealth.org/analyses. It also looks like this if you go down below, and you can explore where are trees healthy and where are trees with dead tops and things like that. So that's a quick overview of like how people are involved. The last few slides I have, it's not very many. I know I'm talking a lot, but the last few slides are just to emphasize why this is important and why you sharing some of these observations is really useful for research. One, we're getting a much better understanding of where trees are unhealthy and where they're not. We can say pretty confidently this is occurring from like central BC all the way down to central Oregon. This is a little bit outdated. Unfortunately, we don't have great representation out east. Again, this is outdated, but if you do find yourself going out to the Northeast Washington, please know that that's a pretty big gap in our understanding of the condition of red cedar out there. We're also starting to get some idea of the type of conditions or the type of site conditions where trees are more vulnerable or less healthy. And so we're looking for patterns like that. But the really cool thing about this is that we'll be able to use it to identify important environmental parameters. And so the way that this works is just by sharing a picture of a tree and noting whether it's healthy or unhealthy, and giving that GPS point. From that GPS, we can extract things like, what is the climate what are the climate variables? There's 250 different climate variables you can collect for a single GPS point, and you can look, 60 years back. And so there's a million different ways you can look at how climate might have affected that GPS point. You can also extract where it is on the landscape and determine things like how hot does that site get based on the direction it faces and the slope and the elevation and things like that. So you can extract some cool topographic information from that. And then finally, we're just starting to explore soils. And so ultimately, we want to be able to take all these conditions and predict, identify which of these variables is the most important for determining if that tree is healthy or not. And then with that, we can identify all the areas where that tree is vulnerable, or all the areas where we should or should not plant red cedar in the near future. With that, we'll also be able to really improve the use of some tools that are available. So there's this cool tool now called the Seedlot selection tool, which helps you essentially decide where to get your seedlings for future climates. And so I'll walk you through that really quickly. Suppose we want to plant a red cedar on the tip of the Olympics here. And so we say we want seeds that are adapted to the past decade or two. And we want them to be best adapted for the climate that's expected from 2040 to 2070. And then the last thing it says, okay, you're talking about the climate prediction for 2040 to 2070, but what climate variable are you talking about? And so that's where you have to really pick. Are you talking about, I want to make this decision based on the future temperature, or do I want to make this decision based on the future precipitation, just for example? And so our plan is to test all of these variables to see which ones are the most important for determining if a tree is healthy or not. But for example, if we picked mean annual temperature, for this point, the dark red areas are where we want to pick our trees. And so it's saying Willamette Valley, Oregon is probably a good place to get your seed for the Olympics based on mean annual temperature in 20 years from now. However, if you switch that and you say, I want to base it on precipitation, then it says, oh, actually, you should probably get your trees from the Cascades or maybe the coast of Oregon. And so this just really illustrates, depending on what environmental or climate variable you pick, you get a lot of different answers. And we really need to figure out which climate variable is important for determining if that tree is going to be healthy or not. And we can do that. It's pretty cool. There's some cool tools out there that help us get this climate data. And so with these GPS points that are being shared in iNaturalist and those climate data, we can start to explore which of these climate variables is the most important for determining if that tree is going to die. And with all of this, if we know where trees are healthy and if we know where trees are vulnerable and we know which climate variables or soil variables are important, then we can really start to experiment with other populations and see, is there any tolerance to these with other populations? For example, is a red cedar that's evolved in Idaho going to be better adapted to our future condition than, say, one from British Columbia, or vice versa? So we can really start to explore that once we have a better understanding of the factors affecting our red cedar. But really, for all of that, we need a lot more observations. We need better understanding of what's going on in all these different areas. It's a really broad issue, and there's no way we could figure this out in a timely manner on our own. So I really welcome you all to participate, and I appreciate this opportunity to share our project with you. I encourage you to visit our foresthealth.org webpage and engage with me through that as much as you like. One last thing that I wanted to mention is that if you're in Seattle tomorrow, we have a Climate Science on Tap event, and at Peddler Brewery tomorrow night. And so I'll be there sharing a much briefer version of this project and why it's important for urban forests. So the last thing I have is that we really would love your feedback, good or bad. I welcome you to share your comments with us and me. And you can do that anonymously on this webpage, foresthealth.org/share. But otherwise, thank you so much. Thank you, Anu.
Thank you so much, Joey. That was a wonderful talk. Very, very informative. Lots of food for thought. So, Joey, should we just have people, how would you like to take the questions? We can, at the moment, people are not able to talk, but we can arrange that. Lyle, should we raise everybody to panelists and then they can talk to Joey and ask their question directly?
Okay, we've got one.
Lorraine, is Lorraine with us?
Yeah, I'm in the meantime, if you either put
Lorraine
it
is here.
Go ahead. Okay.
Lorraine, can you tell us, can people ask questions directly?
I'm going to start handling that.
I think Melanie can talk at this point.
Yeah, let me catch up. I see that. Oh, wait, did I get all the questions? Okay, read them.
Oh, there's a whole bunch of more questions. So Melanie, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
I already asked it, and he answered. I was the one who asked about the base of fronds turning brown. So I'm taken care of. Thank you.
All right, then. Rita, I think, has additional questions at the very least. Yeah, Rita, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. You can read what you wrote. You wrote a whole bunch. Or shall I read it?
Yeah,
or Joey, can you see Rita's question?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, how about you read it out
Okay.
and then we can all listen. And
yeah, Rita's commenting that they live on a ravine on the west side of Mercer. Just right there, that's interesting to me. I know that Mercer's kind of drier than Seattle, I think. So I guess they're commenting more about the hazel and planted 20 years ago. Well, that's good. They're commenting. Okay, so this is a good point. Rita's commenting that her cedar is actually healthy on Mercer Island, and so I do want to reiterate or mention that it's equally important we know where trees are healthy, in addition to knowing where trees are unhealthy. And so we know where more healthy trees are than we know where the unhealthy trees are, which is great. But just for the type of analysis we intend to do, it's really important we have the healthy and unhealthy. So I think, Rita, I need to read a little further, but I do appreciate your comments. It's stimulating some more things. I also see that Regina's asked a question about whether the sooty bark disease is the same as Kretschmeria. And the answer is no, it's a different thing, but it does kind of look the same. It looks similar. But to be honest, I'm not that familiar with Kretschmeria. But I think it's something that we should be watching out for more. It sounds like a lot of people in British Columbia are paying attention to it, and it's kind of been off our radar, but that's another fungus to keep an eye out on. So yeah, so Rita is commenting that they've noticed some root disease on the property in terms of the hemlock. If you see, if your hemlock comes uprooted and there's no intact roots, then it's a pretty good indicator that there's a root disease. I think hemlock's generally more resilient to some of these root diseases than, say, Doug fir. But that's interesting. I would have to know more. I can't tell if there's a question in there or not, Rita. Feel free to speak up. But I do appreciate your observations.
Not really a question. I'm just, you know, I live on the island. And this the iNaturalist thing with the Western Red Cedar sound interesting, and maybe I'll take on a project for the spring and summer to visit the parks and give you feedback on the Western Red Cedars along the trails in our parks, because that sounds really like fun.
Yeah, we would love that. It'd be lovely. And if you run into any questions while you're doing that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. See, Hanny has asked how to find the specific trees. And I'm trying to improve this, but right now, if you go to foresthealth.org/redhot, that will, and then if you scroll to the bottom, there's a link and you click that link if you want to open the Google map on your phone per se. Otherwise, you can just scroll down there and see where the trees are. But my plan is to move that map to the very top so that you don't have to scroll to the bottom every time. But there's a map there. It's just a Google map. So really, if you open that link on that page, and I could share my screen if you all would like, if anyone else would like to know more, but it's that red. I think hopefully you can see my answer in the chat.
Linda has a question, I believe.
I've noticed a lot of dieback of Indian plum, also known as osoberry, and I'm wondering if you've noticed that too, and if you have any thoughts about it.
That's a really good question. So I did a little project with 2 high schoolers from Bellarmine Prep in Tacoma, and we sampled the soil under some alders at a park called Titlow Park near Tacoma Narrows. And in those sites that we were sampling, there was also a lot of dying Indian plum. And that was kind of like early August. It wasn't even the end of the summer. So I don't know if it was a drought thing, then I don't know how they would ever make it through the whole summer, because the summer continued for another month after that. But yeah, we're interested. We're looking to see if there's maybe some fungi in that soil that was affecting the alders, which could also have been affecting the Indian plum at that site. Sorry, what's the correct nomenclature for Indian plum?
Osoberry, but
Osoberry?
that's another
Okay.
common name.
Yeah.
Malaria.
Malaria is the
Malaria.
Cerasifora.
Armillaria is the fungus. Do you think that could be affecting the Indian or the
Armillaria is the name, the scientific.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Genus
You
name.
were talking about armillaria, the fungi, the root disease. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that question, Linda, and I will try and keep my tabs out and see if I hear anything else from other folks. But that's just an example of why it's really great to engage with you all. If there's a native plant that you all are concerned with, we'd love to know so we can try and write a proposal and find some research money to do that, to explore that, especially something that's like a cultural, like a first food, maybe. If there's anything like that you're concerned with, we'd love to try and support. So at this time, I don't know anything that might be contributing to that, but I did see it in one other place.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So there's an anonymous question. I live in the city and many trees are covered with concrete and all the leaves, fronds are swept up. If the city fertilizes trees as otherwise they do not, would they stay healthy? That's a good question. I watched a seminar yesterday as part of there was a red cedar kind of summit in British Columbia. And one of the talks was about fertilizing red cedar out in the plantation when they're growing it for commercial properties. And it was helping the trees grow. But I don't know of any city that are actively fertilizing their native plants. But maybe that would help. That would be an interesting area to research in terms of the red cedar. Is there something we could give it to boost? You know, we don't even know really if watering is that helpful. I assume it would be, especially in the peak of the drought. If you can give it some deep watering, that would be helpful. But that's not very feasible on a large scale. And it's also hard to know how much water that tree uses in a given day. You know, it could take hundreds of gallons to really give it enough. But that's a good question. No one that I know of is looking at fertilizing trees as a method to keep them healthier, at least forest trees like this. Yeah. Great question. I'm not sure if like removing the organic matter is affecting the health of the trees. There's probably a lot of factors in the city that are not good for those trees. But that's a good. I would love to do experiments. I feel like urban cities are just really great, big, giant experiments, and we should be collecting data on everything and seeing what works and what doesn't, and trying to design little experiments in those ways. So I like that comment. So Wendy's commenting as there's a lot of ongoing riparian restoration throughout the west side of the Cascades, where Western red cedars are being planted. Would it be valuable to add data to this iNaturalist database? This comes up a lot, so I'm kind of ashamed that we haven't come up with something like this, but we really do need like a restoration planting monitoring project, because sometimes we'll hear like red cedar does the best when we restore a riparian system, and other times we'll hear that the red cedar are the worst. They the highest percentage of our red cedar die compared to Doug fir and other things. So what's really the issue is that there's not a unified place to collect all this information. And so maybe that's something we should create. And if anyone wants to collaborate in something like that, I would be happy to share our lessons learned and try and help with that. But at this time, this project that we have is not really set up to document regeneration or like seedlings or planted trees. But it's a really good thought. We have heard someone from Washington Park in Portland recently told us like they're not seeing red cedar regenerate as much as they used to in that park. And I don't know if that's something any of you have noticed either, but we'd be interested to know, is there something else that might be affecting the regeneration? Okay, I only see one more question from Abe, but feel free. I'm happy to stick around. I know it's late on a Wednesday, and I really appreciate the number of us that are still here, and I'm happy to answer more questions if you have them. Abe's asked, climate cycles like ENSO and PDO must complicate this. You'll have to forgive me. I'm pretty tired, so I would love to know what those acronyms are. Will I be able to look back in time with these data and see how past climate conditions have caused similar red cedar dieback events? So, this kind of comes back to having more collaboration with tribal communities and really wishing that we had better relationships with tribal elders and could ask some of these indigenous peoples that have been in the land for a long time whether there is ever records of something like this happening with red cedar. And that's just an example of how some indigenous knowledge would really help right now. But I haven't heard anything like that. I've never heard of an event where a red cedar died across the board. And maybe through pollen records, we'd be able to see something like that. But as far as I'm aware, we haven't seen that. We did add a question to the iNaturalist asking, like, when did you first see these symptoms? So if it's a tree in your property, you might be able to say, oh, actually, I saw that top dieback in 2017, or I saw it, a couple of years ago. And so we're starting to get like kind of an idea of when that dieback started. And so with that, hopefully we can trace it back to like really recent climate, but that's as close to that question as we're getting now. I think there's some cool research going on in UBC with this tree ring lab where they're looking at they're looking at the rings and like how the amount of growth every year and matching up with historical climate data. And that's really cool. And I'm encouraged, I'm hoping that they try and explore like the possible events that cause a tree to create a candelabra top, for example. But yeah, that we just don't have enough data, and we only started looking at this too late. So we can't really connect it back to previous climate, but I'll probably do an analysis where I look at climate average over the past 10 years and then climate average over the past 20 years and 30 years and like look and see if it's a long time coming or if it's just the most recent climate that explains where trees are dying and where they're not. Hope that kind of answers Abe. I'd love to chat more with you. It sounds like, oh yes, okay. Thanks for explaining the acronyms. I'd love to chat more with you. It sounds like you might be a climate scientist or at least have studied climate in some way. So I would appreciate your perspectives on any of that. Okay, how am I doing, you all? Are we okay on the questions? Keeping up? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Michael. I see you've shared a contact from King County who's probably a restoration ecologist or equivalent, and those connections are really good. Whoa, okay. Jeff just asked if I've seen any dieback in shore pines, and the answer is no, but have you? I'd love to know. Is that something we should be watching for? I mean, I've seen a lot of lodgepole dieback from mountain pine beetle and stuff, but not like west side shore pine dieback.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi.
This is Jeff and also Deb.
Hi, Deb.
Hi. Yeah, we have a shore pine in our yard, actually, that has been there forever, at least 25 years, and we're noticing it die back. And I've seen this happen on another shore pine somewhat near the Capitol campus. We're in Olympia.
Cool.
Just wondering.
I haven't. You're the first person to mention a shore pine issue to me since within the past, handful of months. Well, really since I started working on the Forest Health Watch stuff. So my knowledge doesn't go back very far, and there's certainly people that probably have better answers for you about possible factors affecting shore pine. I'd be happy if you want to send me some photos. I can look in some of the books we have and see if there's any explanations I can dig up. But I do appreciate you sharing that. It's good to have on my radar that there might be an issue, and maybe we should create an iNaturalist project to document and start documenting where we're seeing issues. Yeah.
Sorry, is there a way for us to submit a sample?
Yeah, totally. So the Puyallup Research and Extension Center, we have a plant clinic, and the lady's name is Jenny Glass, and she does a pretty great job where you can send samples to her, and she essentially takes any sample and tries to figure out what's going on with it. Then if it's sooty bark disease or red cedar or something, she'll usually loop me in. Let me put that link to the webpage. Let me find it. But yeah, that's at our research station in Puyallup. There's a disease clinic. I think she asks a nominal fee to do the diagnosis. If that is a barrier for you, then I would be happy to take a look. But really, I think photos are a good start. Yeah, I'm not finding it efficiently, but if you type in a WSU Puyallup plant clinic, a plant clinic site, here it is, okay. And I just put that in the chat, and so that's a good place to send. Anyone in the Native Plant Society is welcome to send samples to that service. And there's also a lot of overlap with like master gardeners, I assume, and so we work closely with master gardeners, and this is the same kind of service.
Thank you. Did you say that you put it in the chat? Because I'm looking at chat and I'm not seeing it.
Here, I'll put it also in answer to your question. Maybe that will work.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So Margaret's asked, what would fare better than our native cedars, hemlocks, osoberry, etc.? I'm doing a restoration project. Yeah, this is a tricky question. This is kind of where we get sad when we start talking about planting other things than red cedar, but we know that, we need to be thinking into the future and anticipating longer and hotter droughts and more changes in the environment. So what should we do? My best advice I can give to you, Margaret, is just to plant diversity. Try and have a little bit of everything, because we don't know what's going to do well in the future and what's not at this point. We can give some best guesses at this point, but stay tuned, and hopefully we'll have some better recommendations. So I would just say, try a little bit of everything, try and experiment, try a couple different things, and then maybe report back what doesn't work and what did poorly, and then keep track of what does well, then share that with other people in the Native Plant Society or master gardeners or me. Also, don't plan like 100 years from now. Take baby steps, try and plan for what's going to do well in 20 years. And then if you start planning stuff from Southern California now, because it might be really healthy in 100 years, it probably won't live to be 100 years old and experience that. So that's kind of my advice around that, is even though you want to plan ahead, don't plan too far ahead, and really just try and plan a lot of different stuff. Yeah. But certainly like looking at Oregon would be better than trying to plant stuff from like Europe. Please don't plant a bunch of ornamental stuff on your landscape. Yeah. But I expect as a Native Plant Society person, you wouldn't do that. Yeah, but it sounds like if you're, it's kind of wooded, you have some diversity to play with. There's probably, if some stuff might do better in the drainage and some stuff might do better on the hills. There is more and more research coming out looking at that, and there's definitely more and more models that are looking at that and trying to provide climate smart guidance and stuff. So keep your eye out on some of the research over the next few years, and there might be some some tools and stuff out there, but I'm just not, I don't know the right answer at this time. Yeah. Yeah, this has been great. I can tell that it's going long for some of you all, but I'm just thrilled that there's still so many of us, and I really, really didn't expect it. I'm thrilled. Thank you for the opportunity, and well done getting all these folks out. I hope it was informative and they came with and got some of the answers that they were hoping. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Joey. It certainly was
Yes.
very informative. Lots to think
Very.
about. And maybe we can get you back in a couple of years to see if there's what the update is. And we
Yeah.
may have, now that we know what we're supposed to be looking for, we'll be watching in our own neck of the woods and possibly reporting back to you as well.
That would be lovely. I think even in 6 months or so, I should have some decent analysis from what's shared on our naturalists. So would love to share some of the things that come out of it and circle back with you all when we can. Yeah, and I'm really hoping to kind of make a career around this Forest Health Watch program. So happy to do this every year and have a long-term relationship with you all. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. Yeah.
We shall.